I'm Alan Luckett, JTV, Janesville's channel. And then over here I got Derek Schwank, who happens to run Gemini Recording Studios. Is that the full term you call it, Gemini?
Gemini Music Studios.
Gemini Music Studios. And so he records a lot of local bands within his studio. And so we're going to go over kind of how, some of the ins and outs for mixing sound, because obviously we're in the business of recording a lot of things and we could up our game. And so this is kind of covering some of those aspects. So going with what's the norm? Digital's the norm related to sound. I mean, we can still grab things analog, but we have to, and I was doing a session earlier today, I was talking about the Zoom H6 as an audio device to capture things. That does an okay job of capturing things, but that only gives you like 6 channels. But when you got something like a group of people talking, you have a bunch of microphones, you're going to be mixing that. That's just going to be a mono one, the one on the far end. But the one that's closer here, this happens to be a band that was playing at our Music at the Marv recording of concert series for the summertime. And what ended up happening is I found out what band was playing. I went to Voight Music and talked with the bass player for the band. I'm like, okay, what mixing board are you using? And he goes, oh, we're using a Behringer XR18. I'm like, fantastic. So that was the sound system we were using in the other room just now. The beauty of that one is I hook it up to a Wi-Fi router and then I can remotely adjust it and control it. And so I show up at the gig, they're getting all set up, and the guitar player's like, well, I'm used to using this wireless Yamaha system. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'm comfortable with the Behringer. And he goes, you want to mix us? Here you go. And the next thing you know, I'm starting to mix, and then I'm watching the band play, and the drummer's like, I can't hear anything. And so I'm looking and finding the auxiliary send and sending him a better signal and all that. And so I ended up mixing the band live while it was happening. The reason I contacted him and wanted to know what he was using, I ended up bringing my MacBook and plugged USB into his system. So that way I could capture everything. So here's kind of what that thing in the other room looks like, and I got it hooked up to a little Raspberry Pi. Does everybody know what a Raspberry Pi is? It's just this little stupid little computer that works on Linux. That's all I needed to control this mixer outside of the box that was there. But the beauty of it is that this mixer does have a USB out, so I can record every single channel that's in here. I can record directly out to a software, and I prefer to go with Mac. I really kind of, when it comes to audio, you want to be able to get something that's going to be reliable. One thing I've learned too is that once the show's done and I hit save on my recording, I should let my computer sit there for a good another 5 or 10 minutes as I pack up everything else, come back and hit save again, because I've lost files recording something that was like 32 channels, and it was one of these things where I unplugged the system and ran off with it thinking, oh yeah, it's saved, it's good. No, well, stuff was in the RAM and it was kind of floating along. This is the Behringer that we're using in the other room, so it has a USB out, and so that's how I end up capturing a lot of my stuff. Now, here's an example of how that mixer would be used. So each one of these things would end up being a track coming to my software. So they got guitars, acoustic guitars, bass guitars, mics, everything under the sun. Okay, funny thing is, see that guy with the mask on over here? He's right there in the front row. So there's Booyar, and Booyar's in front of his H6, which has an XY capsule on the front, and he's getting a recording there, but he's also taking a feed off of that tangled spaghetti mess behind that mixing board. But if you look over here, here's my Mac, okay? And my Mac is plugged in USB, boom. And so I'm capturing everything. And I'm using, in this particular one, I was using Tracks Live. So if you go to waves.com, waves.com, you can download Tracks Live for free. And the cool thing about the software is that I actually end up grabbing all the audio inputs on the back of that. The first thing the mixer would end up receiving is it comes straight to the gain, and that gain ends up coming, from the gain straight into here. So EQ, reverb, delay, compression, all these fancy words aren't being processed at all. I'm getting it raw coming in here. So now it's up to me in the studio to do the magic of mixing it and making it sound right. So, here's the software as it looks, and that sucker's just cruising along as it's recording. So I can arm up to however many inputs that device has. Keep in mind, I'll record on a Behringer, I'll record on an X32, I'll record on a Yamaha device, PreSonus, whatever. Make sure you have the drivers for that particular item. That's one thing you got to really look at. Drivers, you want to make sure that when you plug it in, the communication's happening between your Mac or your PC and that audio interface. The one thing about PCs is they like to keep things when it's recording audio under 2 gigabytes. So that's where it's unreliable. That's why you would rather go for something that's a Mac base. So here's another example of capturing. So there's the device that Booyar was using. And then he had an audio feed off the board and using the XY microphones. And he might have had some ambient mics for audience and applause. So, and here's a picture of Derek.
Hey, look at that guy.
So this particular gig, this was the Mercenaries, and they're playing at our Music at the Marv series. But you can see you got a bunch of guys on microphones. I don't know if they had separate microphones other than the microphone stands themselves, and they were singing through the same thing, or were they? We'd have to look at the files.
We had separate microphones there for the 2 lead singers, and then the backup singer who's the keyboardist, and then separate microphones on each of the horns as well as on the drums.
Yeah, and so with the drums, I mean, you're doing kick, snare, tom, upper toms, lower toms, 2 overheads for the cymbals. I mean, so it gets to be pretty busy. And so in this particular recording, we had a guy named Bob Hammond who was running the sound. He has a really nice mixing board. I don't even know what brand it is. Do you know what brand it is?
I'm not sure. I believe it's a PreSonus, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, but with his, it's like all I have to do is show up with like a 1 terabyte hard drive, a really nice one that I spent like $100 on, and he plugs it straight into the soundboard. And then when he hits record, and when the show's over, he hits stop, and he hands me the hard drive. And I got every single track of every single microphone input on his mixing board onto this hard drive that I can use to remix. And here's another example of a band that we recorded as well. So you got bass, you got guitar, you got fiddle, you got banjo, you got 2 overheads on top of the drums. Everybody sings. And then you still have your tom, your snare, your kick, your floor. So now we're starting to get close to like 14, 15, 16 tracks of audio. But then we've also done the simple thing where it's 1 choir mic right here, another microphone in front of the keyboard, a feed off of the sound system where they're only running vocals and drums through. So basically this choir mic was picking up our guitar and bass. So that's about it on this end. So now we're going to swap a cable so that Derek can watch himself do some editing and showing you some of the nuances of dealing with sound and what to look for, because obviously when you hit a drum, and it's coming in on the gain, it's all the frequencies from 20 hertz to 20K. So you can end up with a bunch of stuff that you don't need, bleed through from other tracks and stuff like that, but he'll go over that.
Alan?
Yeah.
What kind of microphones?
Well, we're pretty much dealing with whatever, the sound engineer has. So, I mean, some people, when it comes to live bands, will say SM57s. Well, I mean, there's a bunch of other Shure ones, the ones that have like gold, on the inside of them where they're wired. Some of the KSM series are really good. Sennheiser has some good stuff. I mean, if you're going to be recording a band and you just want to put a microphone in front of a guitar amp, Sennheiser has these square ones that can kind of hang over the front grill, and those pick up really well. Generally speaking, you want to use for the overheads mostly condenser microphones because they're brighter and they really pick up the cymbals well. Where we're recording at, we're doing it at, I don't know where those waves, like 48 kilohertz, I think, 24-bit maybe.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm in a studio and I got some high-end recording equipment, we could go 96 and really get some breadth and some depth to it. But, I mean, engineering, when we're recording in the field, we're getting whatever the sound man's using on the stage instead of the microphones that we would bring to a situation. But, for example, when Booyar was recording the UW at Rock County band concert last night, he was using 2 KSMs, 141s, I think, as an XY pattern, and those have gold circuitry, and they're really nice microphones. So we'd use something like that in that kind of environment. But those are like $600 a pair. You'd want to buy them matched, so that way they both work about the same. So, all right, now we're going to see if we can plug in the VGA into this thing and see what we come up with.
Is it okay if I elaborate on that a little bit, Alan?
Yeah,
the
sure.
microphones. Generally speaking, and
Hopefully you can hear 'em.
generally speaking, and particularly if you're out in the field recording a band, an SM57 style mic for instruments and SM58 style for vocals is going to be your go-to for those two. And then for overheads, like Alan said, like shotgun mics, condensers for those sorts of things overhead, because they're going to pick up kind of a good field around the microphone. They're going to catch more than just what it's pointed at, so you'll get some good ambient noise and things like that to include in your mix.
There. It's looking a little squashed, but
All right.
I don't know if you want to sit on this side. I'll bring a chair.
Yeah, I can do that. All right, bear with me. I've had some technical difficulties here today. My laptop, of course, chose today to die, and so we had to make do and get a PC over here. So my name's Derek Shavink. I am the owner and operator of Gemini Music Studios in Janesville, and I'm also the president of 103.5 FM WADR Janesville Community Radio. Both of the businesses are located in the same facility, so that's nice. Gives me a chance to work in a wide variety of audio applications, and I do a lot of work with Alan and JATV. And what we have here is an example, excuse me, of audio files that were recorded at the Music at the Marv concert in Janesville. So as you can see on the left here, we've got your kick, snare, hi-hat. Your drum kit is going to be your first 7 or 8 channels typically. And then we're going to have a bass, a couple of guitars, some vocals, and things like that. The first thing that's really important in mixing audio like this from something that was captured in the field, where you've got multiple tracks and you're not entirely sure what you're working with right away, is to go through and do the steps that you need to do to be organized. And this is one of the areas where many engineers and mixing artists cut corners to save time at the beginning, and in the end they end up causing a lot of grief for themselves. They waste a lot of time and make mistakes that can be easily avoided. So when you're mixing audio in this type of an application, the first thing to notice is that it's not just audio. We also do have our visual field to work with here nowadays when we're mixing audio. Color helps, color coding your various sound waves so that, and I have my own system that I use. Blue for drums here, I've got green for bass. Make sure everything is clearly labeled. And then when you've got your mixer up, which is what you're going to have the majority of the time, you know right where you're working with everything. So the way that I will normally start off a mix down like this is to start with the low end, the bottom end, the kick drum and the bass guitar. You want to make sure that you're getting a nice balance between the two. And we're using the band The Brothers Quinn, and their version of the Marshall Tucker Band's Can't You See What She's Done to Me, which I think everybody is familiar with. Oh, are you going to do this to me?
Because it was armed?
I don't know. We got her.
I don't know if we're loud enough or not.
It's almost there. Come on, little guy. So right there, this is what my studio sounds like in the morning most days, right here. Yes, yep. You will get bleed through. You're not going to be able to avoid that. And I'll tell you, some of the greatest recordings in the history of music were done with a lot of bleed through. Motown Records, for example, all of their recording sessions included bleed through. So did the famous Wall of Sound and the Wrecking Crew. I mean, it's terrible bleed through. In fact, it's kind of crazy that it sounded as good as it did in the end. But you learn to work that to your advantage, and we'll show you how to do that here. So here we're looking for a nice warm glow of low end. And that's nice. We want to make sure that we're not, we're at -5 or so right here. That's higher than I like that to be initially, but we'll work with that for now. So then we go back here to our initial view. Next thing, assigning your instruments a specific spot in the stereo field. This is the most important step you'll take throughout this entire process. And using a template to get things started is a good idea too. It will save you a lot of grief and a lot of hassle to have a template where you can simply drop your music files in. But the way that I will typically do it is, so your stereo field, your pan is what's going to help you control that. And your stereo field goes simply from left to right and then right down the middle. And typically you're going to have two speakers that you're listening to. One represents the left side of the stereo field, the other the right. It's very simple. And the closer you go to center, and the bass guitar is what I run down the center. So you'll notice here, this is at a 0. Starting over here with the kick drum all the way on the left, -1. That's very close to the center. And the way that I do this is I envision the stage. Where would these instruments be in real life? And here's my philosophy. This band, without us putting any of our equipment in front of them, if they got on that same stage, they would set their stuff up and they would play and they would sound terrific. Therefore, my job is now to create a faithful reproduction of that terrific sound, which is not going to happen if I put a bunch of equipment in front of it and start to change it. So I try to envision where they were on the stage and then have the instruments located in the same place on the stereo field on the board. So kick drum slightly off center, snare drum slightly off center. And we'll isolate those. And everything sounds good there. You're looking for your snare drum to have a bit of mid-range to it, a little bit of maybe high mid to it. You want it to crack. Now, Alan had touched on things like compression, EQ, and reverb, and this is where this starts to come into play, is right here. When I am listening to the snare drum, one thing that's going to help that snare drum be audible above all the instruments, because it's going to need to be slightly louder than the rest of the instruments in the mix, is gated reverb. Okay, gated reverb is going to give it a very distinct sound. And what a gated reverb is it's a combination of two effects. A gate is an effect that controls the amount of noise that can come into your signal there, your signal to noise ratio. So your signal is your drum. The noise is comprised of things like wind blowing through and coming through as hiss, an audio hiss that's in the lines in your microphone cables, and that's made worse by distance. So if you're working with a longer microphone cable, you're going to have more hiss. Gated reverb is going to help to keep that noise out of there, as well as providing a room simulation. That's the reverb side. It'll give it a little bit of an echo, and it will help to carry through the qualities of the mid and the high range that we're looking for. And by the way, if I'm talking too fast or too much, feel free to start throwing tomatoes at me or whatever. The tomatoes are cheap. That's okay. All right, so now, again, color helps. So I've got blue assigned to all of my drum tracks. And what we're going to do right, and then we're going to move on. So you're going to get a drum mix down first, complete with stereo field assignments for all of your drums. You got your kick, snare, hi-hat, tom, floor tom, overheads. You got a litany of things here. The kick drum should be felt as well as heard. And everything's sounding good there. Slightly left, slightly right. A little farther right for the hi-hat. A little farther right here for, you know, the tom, which would be here. Floor tom would be here. So that one's on the right. All of these instruments are the only instruments that will stand in that place in the stereo field. This helps to keep things differentiated, helps to keep the instruments from battling with each other for, you know, a supremacy in volume and things of that nature.
Yeah, one side note, live reinforcement, when somebody's mixing a sound in a live environment like a giant, you know, outdoor theater, it's mono. It's going out mono. So the magic that Derek's doing here is taking it from that to something that sounds really rich you want to hear in your living room. Of course, a lot of us broadcast in mono, but we can put a lot of our stuff on YouTube and share it that way, and people can still enjoy it that way.
When you get the dump from the board, are they labeled?
Yes.
Well, actually, this one I ended up labeling myself. So what I ended up doing is I listened to it and I go, okay, that's the tom, that's this, that, and the other. I mean, music is a hobby of mine, so I play in bands, so I'm really aware of this kind of stuff. But I mean, you pretty much just like look at the wave file, see where it peaks, listen to that chunk where it peaks, and then that'll give you an idea where you're at. Oh, it's lead guitar. Oh, it's harmonica, banjo. So. And sometimes some of these singers, they won't sing at all until it gets near the end of the song, and they kind of pop in for a little doo-wop, and that's it, you know? Yeah, question?
Yeah, mine's going specifically when you're doing drummers, with different drummers having different setups, more cymbals, less cymbals. Is there a way that you change your editing or mixing style?
No, that doesn't change it at all. I simply take the recording of that and work with it if it's a bigger drum set or with a lot of cymbals, as I would a little cocktail set with very few cymbals. The way that file comes through is the same either way. That's going to be in your overheads. And we've got overheads assigned here to channels 6 and 7. And here are those, the turquoise ones. And that's going to look the same if it's 3 cymbals, 5 cymbals, 10 cymbals. So, yes.
Yeah, overheads, because I mean, it's hard to isolate every single cymbal, and overheads is basically where it's at, because a lot of it bleeds through into the toms as well.
Yes. Yeah, and lots of times what you'll find is that even without the overheads, you may have enough high end and get a good reproduction of those cymbals without any overheads whatsoever. So the overhead signals in my mixes are usually very low, just enough to add a little bit more of that high end crisp quality that we're looking for the cymbals to provide. Any more questions before we move on? I'm sensing no. Okay, so we've already checked the bass. Now we're on to the guitars. So here you can see.
Oh, you're muted there.
We've got the guitars assigned to the red color. I know if I need to adjust that, I go right for that red.
One side note too, a lot of these guitar players are playing a live environment. They've already sweetened it up to the way they like it and probably practice space. So really sometimes do you add much effect or compression at all or even EQ for guitar? Because usually they got it through a whole mess of pedals, and if you manipulate their sound to where you can't hear their pedal effects, I'm sure it ticks them off. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You wanna create a faithful reproduction of that artist's sound. And in doing that, a little bit of compression will help sometimes, because compression, it provides kind of the illusion of making a signal louder. The way it does that is by clamping off the loudest part of the signal and leveling it with the rest of everything else. So by making it quieter, and it ends up seeming to be louder, and it brings more presence out in the signal itself. And we'll go over compression a little bit more in detail in a minute, but compression is typically added towards the end of the mix down phase. And in this case, yes, I did compress the guitar. And then I do a quick check to see where the volume is. I like my guitar to be no louder than negative 10 decibels initially. That same goes for the bass. The drums will be slightly louder than that. And then we've got the guitar assigned a spot in the stereo field as well. And this one here, we're at negative 3.8. So again, it was just slightly off center. And in this case, I believe, if I remember correctly, the drummer sat in the center of the stage like they normally do, and the guitarist was just slightly, looking at the stage to the left of him, which is why I assigned that spot. And with the stereo field, the reason this is so important is because of this. If you don't assign these spots in the stereo field, it's kind of the equivalent of taking a sheet of paper, and let's say you've got 12 crayons, right? And you take each of these crayons and you color a blue circle in the middle of the paper, and then you take your brown and you color right on top of that blue circle, and then the next one all in the same spot. By the end, you're going to have this smudge of, really ugly color. Whereas if you take each one of those crayons and you left to right, each one of them make a stripe in its own color, now you've got a rainbow. You can see each of these colors as it should be seen. This is the audio equivalent of that. So our guitar is sounding good. At this point now, there's a fiddle. And the fiddle, if you work with mixing a fiddle, you're going to spend a little time on the fiddle. The fiddle is a high-end instrument, acoustic instrument, hollow-bodied instrument. And the combination of these properties results in an instrument that is highly dynamic. Sometimes it's very loud in the mix, and other times within a couple of seconds it'll be almost inaudible. So compression again will help with that. It'll even out that dynamic range of the instrument, making it easier for it to settle into the mix. And then you're going to also work with some EQ on that. Now in this particular case, I rolled off the high end a bit, the high mids slightly, and then the mids a little bit more. Generally speaking, the high mids are going to be what you want to go to in order to create presence for a given instrument in the mix. So I took it easy with that, but the mid-range and the high, rolling it off in this way helps create a spot to where it's always audible and it doesn't seem to be overpowering at times. And we'll give that a listen here. Bagpipes. That's beautiful. It's just beautiful. I'm going to mix that in with the guitar a little bit. You can hear everything. The cadence of the instruments is audible. The little nuances and little details, they're starting to become noticeable, which is what we want. And so at this point now, we're just about ready to go into the next phase and look at a little bit more EQ and compression. But before we do, now we have to take a look at the vocals. And so we're going to solo. We have 4 vocalists in this band. And
some of the people in this room know one of the singers.
yeah, I saw a couple people, the Brothers Quinn, yeah.
We got some UW students here, and Looper, the guitar player, and harmonica player, is a significant person there at the university.
I've seen Looper's name quite a bit the last couple days. All right, so here we have. Now here's one thing you're going to get with your vocal. A lot of bleed, yes. Now, the nice thing about this is, again, mixing digital audio is actually an AV thing. You can look and see, and there's a lot of important information being told to you just by looking at these sound waves. For example, in this microphone, we can see the drum pattern. Each one of these lines represents a drum hit, a kick, and then a snare, and then a kick, and then a snare. So we know that this was right in front of the drums, and it was right there. So we want to make sure that this is panned in a way that complements that drum track. Now, if we get in here a little bit farther, you can see where things kind of start to really come together vocally.
Fly in a champagne supernova in the sky.
That's a different song.
I'm gonna crawl inside and die. Die, die, die. Cause the whole lady now, that mean old
So you just want to know what you're working with
She never
by isolating
told
these
me
tracks, and just give it a listen.
Oh, can't you see? Oh, can't you see? What that woman, Lord, been doing to me? Oh, can't you see? Oh, can't you see?
Whoever's the lead singer of that song, dead center, and then the backup vocals, pan them a little, each one pan them a little bit off center.
If I've got the benefit of time, yes, I will. In a case like this, though, where it's this is like an hour-long performance, and they have multiple lead singers, no, I don't. And the reason for that is because it's simply not realistic to spend that amount of time in shifting the stereo field. So what I do in that case is assign positions very close to center for all of them, but 0.5 decibels off, which gives it enough room in the stereo field not to interfere with each other, but then also holds them all close to center so that when they are the lead vocalist, they do have that center stage spot. And also, I mean, we heard some really nice, lush vocal harmonies there. A few things bring more enjoyment from music to people, in my opinion, than a really nice vocal harmony put together. So we want to make sure that that's the, the showcase of what we're doing here. So the vocals were all right at about negative 6.5 decibels there. So now we're just going to go ahead and listen to our mix and see where we are.
I'm gonna crawl inside and die. Die, die, die. Cause the whole lady now, that mean old woman, Lord, she never told me goodbye. Oh, can't you see? Oh.
Well, I was wondering why the bass drum was not coming through, and that's because I muted it earlier. All right, here we go.
I'm gonna crawl inside and die. Die, die, die. Cause the whole lady now, that mean old woman, Lord, she never told me goodbye. Oh, can't you see? Oh, can't you see? What that woman, Lord, been doing to me?
So I'm hearing this, and this is the most important skill you could have, is your ears. Listening is so important. Mix it so that you enjoy listening to it. If you enjoy listening to it, your audience will enjoy listening to it as well. Yes, I saw you had a question?
Have you ever had a situation where, for mixing, where you had too much bleed, where the vocals, let's say the bleed was too loud, and then you had to mix that? Is there any chance for you, or do you have an opportunity, sorry, better wording.
Oh, you're
You ever
fine.
had to do it yourself, where you had a recording when bleed was too much, and then you fixed it and made it sound better? Can you explain maybe something you fixed that way? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. And the best example I can think of that would be one in a more controlled environment. In fact, at the studio, at Gemini Music Studios, we have a kind of a large live room, and I record bands live there quite frequently. One of them was called Gas Can Alley. Gas Can Alley is a rockabilly act, and they have a drum kit, upright bass, 2 guitars, and a vocal. And in that particular session, miking the upright bass and running it direct, we ran 2 channels for it, and it was really difficult either way, even if we didn't mic it, to get the bass signal to be loud enough without picking up bleed from the drums. So we did have a ton of bleed from the drums, and it created this kind of a delay effect that was offset from the rest of the music. And the way that I handled that was, first of all, when you take a look at your sound files, and I'll just pick any one of them, and we'll use this as a for instance, you can see where it's a little thicker here and a little thinner here. This is going to be what would represent your actual signal versus, maybe some bleed through. There are a lot of really good programs that you can buy and side chain that will take care of ambient sounds like that and bleed through to some degree. I know the name of the one, but it has an audio word in it, so I'm not going to say it. I'm going to say the second word is blocker. The first one, well, the first word's cock, so it's called cock blocker, and you can side chain that, and what that will do is it will block out to some degree your bleed through, so it's more manageable, and it also has a really nice feature that kind of helps you. It works very similar to pitch correction, to where you can dial back certain qualities of it and get it more in line with the rest of the music where it should be, and then from there, what you really want to do is listen to what that bleed through is comprised of, and what you'll realize is that it's the rest of the instruments in the song where they should be. So then you go and you put your instruments back in, and now it's much more controlled and manageable, and it actually creates kind of a cool effect. Yeah.
So, yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking it would be. If you do it right, that'd be kind of cool and create the cool effect.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Okay, so. We can hear it in the mix, but we want it to be more present. This is Southern rock. Southern rock is largely based in Mississippi Delta blues. Therefore, the guitar is very, very important to that style of music. So Alan had touched earlier again on effects and things of that nature. Compression is going to help you at this stage of the game. And what compression is going to do is it's going to level out the dynamic range of that instrument so that it's more level, it doesn't get louder than quieter, and so that it helps you be able to assign it a volume in the mix. And where do we have our guitar? Right here. Now, I'm using a very inexpensive, simple program here made by a company called Magic's. Free software and very expensive software and everything in between nowadays in the modern world, all very, very powerful tools. They all include a lot of really powerful plugins and things that have presets that you can feel free to use, but it does help to know what you're looking for in your compression. Why are you going to choose a particular setting? If you have the time to do so with something like this, what I've done is I've already assigned settings to these. And the compression has a separate volume meter on it, so you can see if you're getting the desired effect. So here, I'll play that again real quick. You can see it's showing at about -20. Now if we turn that off, it's not even registering. So we know we're getting a desired effect. And then this right here is an example of the stereo field and that instrument within it and parts of it that are being quieted down. This is where the signal is being affected right here. So that's a visual that you can use. So we've compressed that. I've actually gone through, and you can see here where these are illuminated. This is my effects bank. And this is where I've applied various compression settings to each of the instruments that needed it in the mix. And so now we've ended up with that guitar being compressed. I'm going to give it a slight boost here. -4.5. Let's give it a listen. And if you take away one thing from this, at the end of this, you should simply be able to hear all of the instruments that are in your mix. You should be able to hear your kick drum, snare drum, various parts of the drum kit. You should hear the bass. You should really feel the bass a lot too. The guitar in this case, of this style of music, very important. We could hear it there, and that's what's kind of providing that the sound right underneath the vocals. It's right underneath there. The vocals are only slightly more loud, but you can hear the harmonies and all the nuances in each vocalist's voice. And then the fiddle is in there as well. So at the end of all of this, you've got a faithful reproduction of a very talented musical act that you were lucky enough to go out there and spend time, professionally speaking, recording that band. That's a great gift. I'm always so thankful just to be able to do this for a living and spend my time doing that. Find enjoyment when you're working with this stuff and have fun with it. Listen and use the various tools that we're talking about here today. The first thing is organizing. Get your session organized. Get everything labeled. Don't try to cut corners or save time here. It's only going to come back to bite you in the end. You will lose your place. You will apply effects to the wrong instrument. You will make mistakes that way. So take 5 minutes, label everything. Provide everything with a color coding system that makes sense to you so that you can go through and in a pinch, you can look and you can see where you are. That's the first step. Next step, stereo field. Make sure that you're assigning everything a specific spot in your stereo field. And then once you've got that going, then you just listen, adjust your volumes, adjust your compression, and make sure your vocals are, in this particular example here, vocals are on top, guitar is right underneath of it, fiddle's right there next to it, bass and drums are the foundation upon which all of that can stand. And you will have a mix that you will be very proud of and the band will be happy with.
All right. That was smooth, man.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it. Are there any other questions? Anybody have any questions to ask here? Yeah, I mean, you could take this to the nth degree, but you still want to make it sound like it's something that's live. I mean, most of the time when you're going into the studio, then you're dealing with gating because you want to try to really isolate that instrument. And for example, in the world of drums, there's always some kind of a bleed through. And you can get into using a parametric EQ to just like shaving off all the unwanted and then gating it so that once that drum gets hit, you're only hearing the punch and not the decay of the sound. And then you can add a reverb in there so you're basically artificially creating the drum's real sound.
Yes.
And sometimes that can be a little but I mean, in the gating world, you can get that crazy if you want to, but keep in mind it's a live performance. You want to have some of that live nuance. Bleed through is still okay to a certain tolerance, because you're trying to replicate something that doesn't sound like it's in a studio, but sounds like it's a live performance and it's good. So
Exactly, and I'm sure you often work under deadlines with these things, and you have to have stuff in by a certain time, and then that's it. It's done. So yeah, working with your natural sound as much as you can is going to definitely help you meet those deadlines as well.
yeah, save frequently, and if you're going to do any kind of crazy experimentation in your mixing, you might want to save it as a different name. That way you can always go, what did I do? I moved a WAV file here to there and it's gone, and just load up the last version and you're good. But yeah. Well, any other?
I've got two.
Yeah.
Okay. The first one is, what's your advice on the best filter where one of your mics, despite your best efforts with testing and everything, is a little bit overmodulated or significantly overmodulated that you can really tell?
Sure. So your FFT filter is a great one to go to in that case. And your FFT filter is, it might also be called a spectrum analyzer. And that's kind of a different sort of an EQ to where rather than, when you've got a graphic EQ like this, where you've got the bands where you can adjust them like this, your FFT filter is going to give you a screen that's going to look much like this, but it's going to give you way more precise ability to be able to pull down a frequency in that stereo field. You're not even, it won't just be 1K. You can get far more precise with that. And there may be some trial and error associated with that, but typically you'll be able to really tame that pretty quickly using an FFT filter.
Yeah, the other thing to keep in mind too is your proximity effect. You know, how close is your person to the microphone? So if I eat this, my bass is heavy duty. If I'm back here, I'm more like right in line where I want to be at. So sometimes it's even the distance from the microphone's key. So, you know, it's like I'd love to tell all the people at the City Council, Plan Commission, Alcohol License Advisory Committee, and all the other committees that we film, you know, don't sit back here and talk. You know, try to get it like about a fist away from the microphone. And don't eat your microphones. And it's because, I mean, each committee's different, and it's just a crazy mess. But that's an example of
Yes.
ugliness with sound.
That's actually the second question, okay? Because your talent is in meetings and other performances, for example, are untrained. So they're going to do what gets them comfortable, and therefore your mic distances are going to change.
Yep.
On the spot, what is then the direction you go in terms of filtering to improve that hollow effect created based on the presentation similar to what you just gave?
Yeah, it's keeping all your tracks as isolated as possible and not trying to do a stereo mix down in a live environment. That's the key. And if you're kind of tied to, well, I'm tied to this mixer and I can't really do much, if you can use your auxiliary sends and isolate each of those things into a recording device that can handle multiple channels, then you can remix it later. And then you can, because I know that you know, sometimes somebody shares a microphone on stage of a live performance, and all of a sudden that person's like a mouse and the next person's like Godzilla. So, you know, you can go in there and chop, normalize the sound, and then kind of shape the sound from there. So, but you know, keep in mind if you're going to have people, you know, like it says solo performance, and Bill gets up and sings, and then Susie gets up and sings, and then the next person, and everybody sounds completely different. In the remix, you would probably want to duplicate that track and isolate just that Susie, that Bill, that Jeff, and mix them individually before you bring it back. I know it keeps it busy, but at least you'll be, you know, each flavor of person will be in their own track outside of like the rest of the choir backing them up. But
And right here we
hopefully
kind
that answers it a little bit.
I can elaborate too. Here we kind of have an example of what I think you're talking about. One vocal is simply louder than another, and essentially what it amounts to. And in this case here, we've got two vocal tracks, and you can tell just by looking at the signal, this one's going to be louder than this one here. You can adjust those in your EQ without having to adjust the volume necessarily. One thing to do is to kind of listen to the vocal qualities of each speaker, and if you've got somebody with a deep voice, give them a little bump, you know, in the bass department there, you know. Whoops, that's not the one. Yeah, that was what it. You know, for example, if somebody with a deep voice, you know, you don't want to go under 1K for that for sure. Right in this range down here, maybe not too low, but just give them a little bit of a bump there. You'll be surprised at how much more present they are in the mix. The other thing, your go-to in your EQ for presence in a microphone is going to be your high mids, and in this case, if you use a parametric EQ like this one here, you can also give that a slight boost. I had that at 1.9. I mean, I'll just dial it in actually, and we'll just go 2.2, quarter of a decibel. That's going to give the one that you want to have more presence, is going to give them that little bit of a bump naturally. So those are a couple things that you can do to help tame that. Yes.
Following up on that, you make that bass voice more present with the EQ. Then might you bring the whole level of that channel down a little bit because he's now overpowering?
Hopefully not. If you do it in small increments, in like a quarter of a decibel, 0.3, you know, a bump like that should give you the ability to just go up a little bit. And then give it a listen. You shouldn't have to adjust the volume. At this point, you're fine-tuning so that the speakers are as close to level as possible. So no, the point would be to keep the volume there, but just accentuate the presence of somebody who's maybe not quite as present in the mix there. I hope that answers it, yeah.
Any other questions? Well, thanks, Derek.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd also like to say, oh, thank you. You're far too kind. You're far too kind. I probably gave Alan a heart attack here today because yeah, I'm sorry about that.
We survived.
Yes, we
survived.
have. So far, so good. I have a website, GeminiMusicStudios.net. My contact information is on there. Email, telephone. If you should have any questions related to what we've talked about here in the workshop today, please feel free to contact me through the website. I'd be glad to talk to you. Just let me know what your questions are, and I will get back to you as quickly as I can with as helpful of an answer as I can.
Oh, Ross has a question in the back.
Well, it's
Or
not so much
comment.
a question, but I wanted to remind everybody that on your table is a card with some
Oh.
QR codes. on
QR
it.
code, yes. Please rate this. Give us some feedback.
This is how we decide what sections we do. So, anything you can do, anything you want to say, good, bad, whatever, please take a picture of it and make a comment. Thanks.
Thanks.
All right.
Yeah, and I'm going to be working with the sound in this room and also in the main hall. So if anybody's just curious how the Behringer works, I could show them how that mixer, how we're using it in the environment that we got. But all right, I think we're done. When's the next session start? 2:30? All right, perfect timing.
All right. Thank you very much for coming, everybody.